Good morning, St. Mark's and our friends who may be viewing us today. We're happy that you're here and taking advantage of this, and we hope it's helpful. I still need some ideas for future programming. I have some planned with some interviews and so forth with people that I believe you will find fascinating at some level. But there are those moments like today when I would be responding to something you said if I wasn't going instead to respond to something on my heart, which I think is important to St. Mark's Lutheran Church right now. Let me start in what may be an odd way, and that is my grandfather on my father's side had two congregations in Texas before he moved to Western Pennsylvania, first to Punxsutawney, where my dad was born in 1898, the ninth of 10 children, and then on to Pitcairn, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, where I grew up. I jokingly say, and I don't mean to insult anybody with this, but that I wake up in a cold sweat every now and then believing I could have been a Dallas Cowboys fan. For either Eagles fans or Pittsburgh Steelers fans, that's not a nice idea, obviously. In any event, my grandfather, if he were alive today, would be, let me think, he was 56 when my dad was born. My dad was 46 when I was born. I'm 76, so you've got a lot of years there covered in the generations that is quite infrequent today, I believe. And the point is that even back then, clergy were the only people who moved around a great deal. We didn't have all the specialization and in other professions and the economy that allowed for a whole lot of movement on the part of others, but clergy moved. It was not expected that they would stay all that long in a particular parish. When I graduated from seminary in 1971, it was presumed that the average stay of a pastor in a congregation would be between 6 and 8 years, and that therefore a pastor graduating would have either 4, 5, or possibly 6 pastorates in his, and it was his in those days, service to the church. Something changed, and that is that it was discovered that long-term pastorates were more valuable than had thought to be so earlier. And a long-term pastorate was defined as essentially between 12 and 15 years, not 20 or 30 years, but between 12 and 15 years. And if the average previously was 6 or 8 or 10 years, then you're getting stretched that. It was shown that a pastor's effectiveness in a particular community and a particular congregation did not even begin until he and now or she had been there for about 3 to 4 years. It takes that kind of time to get to know really the personality and nuances of the congregation, the needs and particulars of the community in which the congregation sits, and so forth. So long-term pastorates would give somebody 8 to 10 years beyond when they started to become effective. Now, there are lots of studies that show what needs to happen when a pastor were to stay beyond 12 to 15 years, but that's another subject. The reason I bring this up is because interim ministry, in its formal sense, began because of two basic realities among clergy. One, that those pastors who stayed long-term, so let's call that anything over 12 years and up to, I was at Concordia for 29 years and 7 months. Any pastor who stayed that kind of length was going to make for some pretty radical adjustments on the congregation's part when somebody new came. And interim ministry was designed to allow the congregation to basically get over the long-term pastorate of the first person, so that they're free to then enter a new era and a new phase of their ministry with the new pastor coming, whoever he or she happened to be. The other reason that it developed is that an unfortunate reality is that pastoral indiscretions had creeped into the system and became more frequent. I say that with sadness, but it's the reality. Often of a sexual kind, but sometimes of a financial kind, and other just bad judgments and sinful behavior that left the congregation with its head spinning and its heart wrenched and not knowing quite what to do about its future. Obviously, those kinds of circumstances would leave a congregation scarred in any event, but could they, in fact, move on to a new ministry with some trust, if you will? That's what got violated, was trust in the previous pastor, with some trust renewed and some spiritually driven energy accomplished. So we have interim ministry now in many denominations as standard procedure for those congregations who are willing to accept it. And interim ministry is, when I refer to it, is formal or what we call intentional interim ministry. There's a particular process that the congregation goes through. I want to delineate that yet again for a few moments today. But in the denominations, the Presbyterians were early into that. The Lutherans, especially what became the ELCA, early on, at least in some synods, depending on where the synods were. Certainly Southeastern Penn Synod, from which I come, was one of the early ones and one of the best ones in the ELCA. The Episcopalians do it. The United Church of Christ does it. And as you may have noticed when Rabbi Grumbacher was here, he's doing interim rabbinates in Virginia. And believe it or not, his training was through our Lutheran seminary in Philadelphia. He will often joke with me that with the name of Grumbacher, if he couldn't find a Jewish interim to do, he could certainly fake it in a German one, and we joke about that a lot. So here I am at St. Mark's for a year now, and we've been moving through this process. Let me again delineate it, and that is that the first phase is coming to terms with your history, what the congregation needs to try to accomplish, not in an absolute complete way, because that's impossible, but to the extent that it can, to get over the former pastorate, whoever he or she happened to be, to bring out of their past those parts of their history that they want to retain and possibly renew. And what aspects of the ministry need to be altogether new based on the changing of times or the nature of the congregation or whatever was occasioning this newness that congregations face every now and then. We had encounters, we called them, I think 6 or so of them, attended by something like 70 some people. I must admit to being disappointed. My thresholds are pretty high in expectations, and we fell short of that. But hopefully what happened for those who came and for those who paid attention to what got reported about those who came is that we were given an opportunity to vocalize what kinds of things we really were delighted about at St. Mark's Lutheran Church and what kinds of things really made us angry or disappointed or whatever. And we needed to do that before we could move on to the next phase. Now, at some level, we're still doing that. It goes on and on and on and on. My hope would be that most people at St. Mark's Lutheran Church have come to terms with their relationship with Pastor Scott, one way or the other, and can put that in its proper place so that the new pastor, whoever he or she may happen to be, can be free to develop with you the ministry into the future, which may very well in some ways be decidedly different than what we have been used to, especially now that we have experienced the COVID-19 matter, which we're not real sure will be over anytime soon. What comes next is the visioning stage, anticipating what is it about this congregation's future that the members themselves believe ought to happen. And you were given some forms to fill out and to put into the green box here in the narthex. And the transition team, the 7 of us plus 1 liaison council member, really treated those things with seriousness, and we deliberated and tried to interpret them in a way that honored them on the one hand, and at the same time put together a vision which was genuine for St. Mark's Lutheran Church at this point in your history. The Covenant Journey, which came out, which I have a copy of here, and you have received several copies by mail, is the product of that experience. It was literally, even through the COVID times, time we spent on Zoom and so forth, continuing to grind out what we believe was Spirit-led deliberations grounded in the gifts and passions of the people of St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Now, we've heard some things about this. Some people believe, well, there's really not a whole lot new in it. There's nothing surprising, nothing that comes out of us and bites us. And that's because it is fundamentally, and I've said this before, I will say it again, a strategic document. It says we are going to go in this or these directions. It does not get into how we're going to get there, when we're going to go, or why we're going to get there. That remains to be discovered as we together, and I say this very passionately, together, you as a congregation and your new pastor move into your future in a cooperative and beautifully loving a way. But 2 things that stand out here, and whether you saw it or not, I will lift them up now, is under outreach ministry. We will promote justice and peace in the name and love of Christ. It is almost impossible in this day and age for a Christian community not to have some relationship with the issues of justice and injustice in its immediate community and in its world. We cannot ignore, not that we have in the past, but certainly into the future, we cannot ignore those things about which God has clearly made it known that we need to be concerned about. In Romans 12, we are told to hate what is evil and to love what is good. So we need to add that, if you will, to our agenda into the future. What's it going to look like? We don't yet know. We will establish those kinds of tactics, if you will, together. The other one is under our mission, we, the people of St. Mark's, will renew our commitment to sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, both to fulfill the Great Commission, to go and make disciples, and also to welcome those who are new in the faith and or returning to active involvement. Now, there's more there, but let me just give you a quick Bible lesson about that, because it's so very, very important. We turn to the book of Acts, chapter 2, and read things like this. Those who welcomed his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. That's the church in Jerusalem. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread, which is a reference to communion and not just eating together, and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. That's Acts 2. I would submit to you that in the book of Acts, you've got numerous stories on how the church of the early church sent people to various other communities with the message of the gospel. And I call that active evangelism. They went out. They had intentionality about going and sharing the love of God in Christ Jesus with other people in hopes of making disciples, as they were instructed in the Great Commission. But what we have here in Acts is another situation where they were doing certain things and people were added to their number on a daily or regular basis, those who were being saved. And I call that attractive evangelism. People would simply look at this Christian community and say, that is really special. We want to be a part of that. And they came. Now, if you put this on a grid, you'll see that active evangelism is in purple, that's going out, and attractive is in green. And the kinds of things that the church was about that were attractive were worship and fellowship and study of the apostles' teachings, Holy Communion, and prayer. The more that each of us is committed to doing these kinds of things, ideally, and certainly in a biblical sense, the more attractive we become to the world around us. And for a lot of decades in this congregation's history, that was the case. We didn't go out so much as it was that people heard about what it is we were about and came to us. That's changed, and so we must be prepared into the future to do some very intentional outreach. What's it going to look like? Don't know. That's something that you and your new pastor will have to design together, do it in keeping with our Lutheran theology, and we're not going to become somebody we're not, but at the same time, we simply must reach out to people of all ages, excluding no one, but perhaps with a special emphasis on that group of people who have been leaving the churches in great and abundant numbers, and that's sad, but that's people between the ages of 18 and 38, obviously often with little children who are not going to be trained in the things of the Christian community if we don't grab them here pretty quickly. That's the second phase. What's important about that, folks, is that we all buy in or sign off on it, if you will. Were it not for COVID, we would have had several meetings to discuss the covenant journey, to ask questions about it, perhaps make some criticisms, to adapt it so that it more truthfully represented who we are and what we intend to do. And then we would have adopted it as our covenant journey. A large blow-up of this would be placed here in the narthex, and you would be asked when you came to church to sign it. Often we ask people to sign these kinds of things near some part of the vision or covenant journey that they have a passion for, because not everybody has Christian passions for the same things, because they don't all have the same gifts. Obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to do that. And so I really, really, really beg you to look this over again, pray about it, make notes on it, do whatever you have to do, send it in, or at least email us and say, I am willing to sign off on this. Why? 2 reasons. One is that the council is in the process already of organizing itself so that we can learn to live into the vision. All the old patterns of how a council works and how the leadership functions are going to have to give way to newness in terms of being able to fulfill this. That's one thing. The other thing is this is one of the primary documents that candidates for our ministry here will be able to see. And as I shared in the last issue of The Lion, it is extremely important that we be honest and authentic, that this truly represents it. If it doesn't, we're lying to them or we're cheating them. In the same fashion that when the call committee asks the candidates a question about this, that, or the other thing, if they don't tell us the truth or the whole truth, they have lied or not been genuine with us. So we're Christians. We want this to be honest and have integrity and meaning for us and for them, so that the matchup between St. Mark's Lutheran Church now and its new pastor will be like this. And please, I say that like this because there's going to be something very prayerful about getting to that point and about living out that point afterwards. So the council is in the process of learning to organize itself around the covenant journey with this balance, if you will, between how we're attending to ourselves spiritually, in how we're educating ourselves and how we're worshiping, how we're doing those things that typically congregations need to do in order to function as Christian communities internally. But also, the council is organizing itself so that as many council people as there are doing the internal aspects of our ministry are creating, again with the new pastor sometime, methods and ways of reaching out both with the gospel and in the caring ways that St. Mark's has traditionally done through hunger relief and other efforts and so forth. So, to renew, the historical phase, get over the past, save from the past what you want to bring into the future, bring new things into the future. Covenant journey or vision, that's what we're generally aimed at. That's the direction we sort of want to take. And then organizing ourselves to fulfill that. And then the fourth stage is reintegrating with your judicatory. Now, in United Church of Christ, that's different than the Presbyterians and their presbytery, and Lutherans with our synod. So whatever the judicatory is, there's often been some kind of tension or benign neglect between congregations and their judicatories that needs to be renewed in a positive way. Lutheran Christians have always believed that there's certain things that can be done corporately by groups of congregations better than we could each do alone. Some things are essential. The education of clergy and the support of seminaries and other institutions of higher learning. St. Mark's doesn't have its own college or seminary, obviously. So the judicatories need to support those things. Certain kinds of mission work. Historically, it's the national church body that supports missions in Tanzania and other kind of countries around the world that we're familiar with. Some denominations have missionaries come back on furloughs, visit a bunch of congregations like them, and raise money. Lutherans have generally found it more productive to do it collectively. But there's benefit in terms of having the missionaries come to a church and solicit funds and support that we need to learn about, because my daughter, middle daughter, belongs to a congregation. What it is, it doesn't matter. It's not Lutheran. And what they're able to do on a Sunday morning is to Skype a congregation in Africa that they support. And people in that congregation can literally see the young kids going to Sunday school and having a well built, and adults being able to work on something that the congregation has supported. And those people out in the bush or in the village can look back at the people here and notice the facial expressions and hopefully the joy on the faces of those who support them. So judicatories have their boundaries beyond which they can't go. and congregations can feel free to do things that enrich and enhance and deepen, especially their mission around the world. But at this juncture, what's really very important is that judicatory, namely the Delaware-Maryland Synod, is where we're going to get the names and credentials and information about candidates for the ministry here. So that relationship needs to be one where the Delaware-Maryland Synod realizes that St. Mark's is in a good position to call a new pastor, having done its homework and having started to organize itself appropriately. And we need to trust that the Synod is going to offer us candidates who will be good for us in terms of leading us into the future. That relationship, therefore, gets renewed in all of that and is productive. The last phase is the calling of a pastor, and we're about there, by the way. There's some loose ends to pull together, but a call committee has been formed minus one person. We're looking for one more person. That group of people chosen by Kitty, the council president, will be confirmed by the council as a whole. That's not something the whole congregation can be voting on. It just would be too unwieldy. And then they'll get to work on the ministry site profile and some other things about us that we want to present to candidates, a lot of paperwork. And the Synod will then send us paperwork and some other things about candidates. We have a meeting on September 8th with the Synod representative, and her name is Robin Litton, the Reverend Robin Litton, will give to the council and to the call committee all the instructions they need so that they can get to work. So things could, no promises, because we simply don't know how long it will take for the right person to be chosen and the right person to choose us. Don't know that. We need to be very prayerful about that, because most of the mistakes that get made are made in haste, and we don't want that to happen. But we could be moving here pretty steadily along. Certainly the earliest that possibly a pastor could come would be the first of the year. And I would like to think that no later than the first of summer next year. Pastors tend to move, especially if they're with families, at times when their children aren't too disrupted by those changes. Although we're in COVID-19, and that presents a whole nother matter to the call process. What I'm told, however, is that pastors are considering moving right now. Pastor Litton told me she has an installation every Sunday in September. That's all very good news for us. But folks, we want to be in the best possible position in an honest and authentic way to present ourselves to candidates who will be attracted to the fact that we have done the homework, we've done the interim processing, and we are very serious about moving into the future in the name of Jesus Christ, with the message of Jesus Christ, to the glory of God in Jesus Christ, and with hope for our own congregation and for our community and our world in the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to ask me any questions. Give me an email or a phone call. I'll be happy to try to respond intelligently and accurately as I can. The Lord be with you mightily. Stay healthy. Be reasonable during this COVID-19, and anticipate in a hopeful way when it will dissipate and be a thing of the past. Thank you, and God bless.